Today we're here talking about four-strokes. I have always wanted to try a four-stroke dirt bike. I've ridden lots of friends of mine's bikes, I've worked on many bikes as well, but I never really got the whole picture because I really didn't have one myself. So at the end of 2012, when KTM announced this 2013 model year, I said, I have to have that bike. That is the bike I have to have. I refused to buy a four-stroke with the Kickstarter on it, and this was the first bike with the good motor. I waited a long time for it, so I bought it. It took me a little bit of time to get used to riding it. Four-strokes have a little bit of engine braking and they weigh a lot more than what I was used to, a 125 and a 144, but I figured it out. And to be honest with you, the four-stroke has taken me in a place that I didn't expect to go. I started racing as a consequence, I started doing the main track as a consequence, and I really felt very comfortable on this bike. At the end of 2013, my first year of ownership, I decided to go ahead and rebuild the motor with 110 hours on it. It seemed like it was a good idea. And that's where our story begins. I enjoy building motors, and I generally do a very, very good job at it. I wanted to make sure I did the right thing. And for me, the right thing was buying the tools to rebuild the motor, buying an actual KTM engine stand to hold the motor, and most importantly, replacing every wear item I could replace. Getting the service manual on disc, getting everything I needed and piling it all together in big boxes in my garage, waiting for the day when the motor needed a rebuild. It didn't take very long. In December of 2013, I started hearing some funny noises coming from the motor. Sounded like a bad water pump to me. And I said, you know what? It's time to do the rebuild.
With the moonlight to guide you, feel the joy of being alive. The day that you stop running is the day that you arrive. And the night that you got locked in was the time to decide. Stop chasing shadows, just enjoy. The door to your house, don't let anybody in. It's a room that's full of nothing, no blood underneath your skin. Your face against the window, you can watch it fade to gray, but you'll never catch the fickle wind if you choose to stay. But oh, the road is long, the stones that you are walking on have gone. With the moonlight to guide you, feel the joy of being alive. The day that you stop running is the day that you arrive. And the night that you got locked in was the time to decide. Stop chasing shadows, just enjoy the ride.
So I pulled the motor out of the bike, put it on my bench, started the disassembly process, and sure enough, the motor was in very, very good condition. I was actually very surprised because everybody had warned me about KTM motors being really fragile, but when I pulled it apart, I said, this thing is robust. It's built very, very well. I can't believe people would complain about these motors. It looked really good inside. Yes, it needed a crank, it needed a rod, it needed a new piston, but outside of that, everything looked pretty good. People had warned me about the valve retention system on this bike because it uses steel retainers and titanium valves, and that over time, the steel retainers and titanium valves actually come loose. And so I was very, very concerned about not doing the head. So I ordered all the parts to do the head, including the retainers and the springs and new valves, and most importantly, the new valve guide oil seals. We'll hear about more of that in a moment. The first disassembly went very, very smooth. Popped out the crank bearings, go ahead and put those new crank bearings in, did all the other case bearings at the same time to make sure everything was pretty good shape, and of course we went ahead and pulled the whole head apart. I cleaned the head up myself, and I reassembled the head myself the first time around, and everything looked really, really good, except for those oil seals. And I didn't quite understand what was going on with those oil seals. There was a very, very interesting problem with them. They would stay in place until the valve moved up and down. As soon as that valve moved up and down, they'd fall out of place. Like, that's kind of weird. So I took the head over to a friend of mine and showed him, and he said, oh yeah, you need a special tool to knock these in. And he puts it in, and he goes tap like this, and he pulls it out, and the valve seal got stuck in his tool. And he's like, oh, well that's kind of weird. And he puts it on and tap, and it gets stuck. What the heck's going on here? So the third time around when he did that, he didn't notice that the valve seal had fallen off the tool, and he put the tool directly onto the valve guide and went tap really hard, and he damaged my valve guide. At the time, we both looked at it and said, it doesn't look too bad. You know, it's a little bit of a nick on it. It seems okay. So I got a drill out, and we just drilled just a little bit of the top just to clean it up, you know, so it looked okay, and okay, makes sense, doesn't look that bad. So I said, well, I guess I got to call KTM Orange County and see what's going on. So I grabbed all my parts in my head, I drove down to Orange County KTM, dropped it off to them, and I said, hey, what do you guys think about this? They're like, yeah, these are the wrong seals, you know. You've got the red seals, which is for the 350, and the right seals are the other black seals for the 250. And I said, but I ordered the parts from the parts catalog. How could they be the wrong part numbers? And sure enough, they verified that even on their own website, it had the wrong part numbers. But on ktmdealer.net, it had the right part numbers. I said, can you guys order me the right parts? And so I went down the list of the wrong parts, and they ordered me the right parts. So I just dropped the head off, and I said, since the head's here, why don't you guys rebuild it, and I'll come down and pick it up. They rebuilt the head with all the right parts. I went down and picked up the head and got the head back, and I go ahead and throw it on my motor and, you know, hit the starter button. Turned it on and it ran great, except it was pumping out white smoke. So basically my first real running of the motor was a bunch of white smoke. Mind you, the service manual I bought didn't work on my computer or the computers on a KTM Orange County either. So I was completely lost at what the torque figures were supposed to be. I was basically judging my torque figures on what people on the internet were telling me about. So I'm freaking out because my motor seems to be running fine, it's just that it's puffing out white smoke. And I get on it and I start to ride around the block, and sure enough, the white smoke gets worse and worse and worse. And I'm like, you know, this is obviously, you know, coolant getting into the cylinder. So pop the head off, and there's nothing wrong, there's coolant in it. This is a brand new head gasket. How could this thing be broken already, you know? So I'm frustrated, and I call Orange County KTM, and they ship me a brand new head gasket, and I put the brand new head gasket on it, and I tighten it down, and it's got the same exact problem. It's just puffing out white smoke. So I'm like, this is really confusing. And that's when I heard on the internet about this problem these motors have, which is the brackets that hold the crank bearings in place need to be Loctited really, really heavily for them to work. And so here I am, motor's back together again, and I didn't do that process because I didn't have a service manual. And shit, you know, I had to go ahead and take the motor all back apart again, all the way down to the crank, and lock those down with Loctite and put it all back together again. Very frustrating process. So that, at that point, was my fourth build. That was the fourth time the motor had been out. Then I put it back together again, and I put it back in the frame, and same thing, white smoke puffing out. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And I'm revving it and revving it and revving it, trying to get it to clear and trying to get it to clear, and it's just puffing out white smoke, and it's just really annoying, and then, yeah, it stops running. Start it up, starts, run, yeah. Starts, run, yeah. And then couldn't get it to start after that. Just spun. And that was it. I took the head off and I put it on my chair, and I go to work on the bottom end, and I pull the head gasket off, and it looks clean, and I'm looking at the head in the chair, and it's at an angle. And I lift it up, and one of the valves is stuck open. It was the valve guide. What was happening is that the valve wasn't sealing all the way. There was just no reason for any of this. The motor should have been built right the first time. Had my service manual disc worked, I bought a service manual disc for this reason. Had it just worked, it would have been fine, because it would have read in there, I had to do this, this, and this, and it would have been fine. So it was really frustrating, and I look back at that moment, and I was just so angry. And I took the head down to Orange County KTM, and they're like, yeah, you know, need a new valve, need a new valve guide, and it's gonna take 2 weeks to do this. And I'm just like, 2 more weeks without my bike, you know? You know, they get the head together, and they call me and have me come down and pick it up, and I spend hours there with them because they hadn't shimmed it. And I'm like, I'm confused. You guys, I told you guys to put the head together, why wouldn't you reshim it? So they had to reshim it, and it was an absolute train wreck. and they couldn't get that valve to shim up. They just couldn't. And so it was just this back and forward and back and forward, and finally, you know, they just said, we can't do anything, it won't shim up. So they dropped it off at a different shop to have them look at it, and they couldn't find anything wrong with it either. And the only thing they could say is that there's got to be something wrong with the seat. And he measured the seat out and saw, you know, he thought there was some problems with it and said, you got to either buy a new head or replace that seat. And I didn't want to spend more money. I didn't want to spend more money on more people telling me more things that are wrong with my motor. I just wanted to ride the bike. So for me, the easiest solution was to just buy a used head or a new head, and I'll just assemble it myself, you know? And so it's exactly what I did. I bought a head, I assembled it myself, washed it down, cleaned it all up, shoved it in the motor, and went and found the right torque settings, found out all the time the torque settings for the head have been wrong. Everybody online had been giving me the wrong torque settings. And all of a sudden, I finally found the right torque settings and I torqued the head down properly, and the motor's been running great ever since. So in this whole thing, I learned a really big lesson, which is, you know, when one thing doesn't add up, you have to stop and make that one thing work first before you can move on. I was trying so hard to push this process forward, and this was all just mechanical stuff. You put the screws in, you take the screws out, you know? But in reality, there's more to it. Had I just had a service manual that worked, I would have been in better shape. I went and did the right thing and purchased it. Everything I did was the right thing. I ordered all the right parts, but again, KTM was wrong on the part delivery. So in hindsight, you know, I probably shouldn't have even taken it apart at the time. I probably shouldn't even touch the head. I probably should have rode it until it finally blew up on me, and that's what I'm gonna do now that I have this new build. I'm just gonna run it until it stops running. Because honestly, the motor's so robust that I can't imagine it actually putting a crank to the side of the cases or something like that. It's too robust for that. So that's my story, and back on the Öhlins here today, and it's been fantastic to be back on the Öhlins and be back riding the package that I had last year, 6 months after I started this process of rebuilding the motor. It's been a long process, and it's great to be back on my 4-stroke again.
Stop chasing shadows, just enjoy the ride. 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 Stop chasing shadows, just enjoy the ride.